Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week, we have a very special guest back yet again on the program, Dr. Dario Nardi. Welcome back to Personality Hacker.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
It's late in the day. You're going to leave tomorrow. You've been here for probably at our home studio, like over a week?
Yeah, 10 days.
We've been doing so much recording and production work, and at the last day, in the evening of the last day we're recording this, we're all tired, but I'm like... There was nature films where the fig tree is ripe, and I want to just eat as much fig fruit as possible while it's available. So we want to have you on the program as much as we can before you have to fly out tomorrow. So that's why we're gonna keep pushing, even though we're tired.
No, I understand, and the show must go on.
That's right.
Yeah, we're squeezing that lemon until all the juice is out. So, speaking of which, you and I were having a conversation recently about communication with other types. In fact, you even made an app that has a bunch of words that if a person uses these words or sort of weaves them into sentences, that they are designed to help build rapport with various personality types. And I made the comment that I thought that usually if you can get it right with the person's judging function, so their thinking or feeling function, that at least you won't trigger them sort of basically the should statements of the world. Like that's where our judging functions give us kind of like a shouldness, right? Like this is the way the world should be. And if you can get those right, you're usually okay. And then you mentioned, well, actually, if you are, say, an intuitive and you go to meta perspective with maybe a sensing type or vice versa, that can be easily just as triggering if their worldview is, if there's a mismatch there as well. Yeah. And that made me think of a conversation I was having with, or a history of conversations I've had with my ESTJ stepson, who is now 14. But there was so many years where I would try to explain things to him. He would ask me, like rationalize this, give me an explanation for why this is a thing. And I would try to do that, and he would almost get really upset and mad and frustrated with me that I was making it go to meta perspective. He's like, just talk about the real thing. So I've learned that in order to communicate with him, if he asks me a question that I only have, I would call an abstract response to, like a meta perspective response, I almost have to pre-warn him. I have to set the expectation that that's where it's going and go, is that what you want? Would you like me to explain it? And I've noticed that as long as he goes, yes, I'm willing to go to that place, then he doesn't get mad or frustrated. But it's almost like I have to ask consent first. Have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's the kind of thing that can happen around the dinner table or at work, something like that. And I think even communication issues can happen between, say, two people with intuiting preference if the judging function is different. An example would be if the NF is going to be giving me a metaphor as their explanation for something. And immediately my mind is going to go like, but what is the practical outcome that's going to be? Sometimes it might even be like, oh, that's actually not a good metaphor. But for the most part, it's just always going back to that extroverted thinking, sort of like what are the consequences of this? Like, how are you going to make this happen? The logistics of it, all of that. But if it is intuiting combined with it, then I'm like, cool, it's pretty good.
Yeah. What's your rubric for communicating with the various types? Like how have you, do you try to kind of size up the person's intuitive and sensing preferences or their thinking and feeling? Like which angle do you tend to go with?
Well, first of all, I have to ask whether I like the person and need to interact with them. And if either of those are no, then I simply don't talk to them or interact with them. And that's just the way it is. Then there's another environment where I feel regardless, like just when I go to a type conference, for example, where people are all type aware, I don't feel the need to have to adjust to other people. They're almost expecting me to be INTJ. And so it's like, I don't need to put anything else. I don't like having to adjust with family members either. I'm like, why do I need to do this? But of course, sometimes that has to happen. And it's really that middle ground. So let's say, what do I look for? The basic principle is rapport building. So it means listening and sometimes throwing out some words to see where does the person's affect come in. So this is a process that I went through when I was an undergrad and a graduate student. I'm listening to the teacher give an explanation, and I can just hear from the voice tone what the teacher actually considers important. And then I know to focus on those things for the test, even if those were not explicitly in the syllabus for review for the exam or something. And I would have classmates, specifically I'm thinking of 2 ESTP guys that I knew who took several classes together. Smart guys, but they didn't understand to listen for voice tone. And then they're like, but we studied so hard, and like the teacher didn't even ask the things that he told us about. And I'm like, I studied for those because I knew they would be on the test. So I would say like listening is important, and yet definitely listening is not my strength. So there is this very fast process of like sort of overall, what is this person's look and feel of type? And it doesn't need to be exact. You can be just like, oh, ENTP or ENTJ. Like I'm not really sure exactly which, but I know I can safely be in the NT space. And then actually what becomes difficult for me with all 4 of them is something that for me as an NT is an issue is when the person is a dumb version of their type or like a difficult, unhealthy version of their type. And then I'm like, and there was nothing worse than a dumb NT. So, I mean, in my book, then I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do it. But for the most part, of course, there involves a little bit of adaptation. And I think a lot of it is simply also paying attention to what the person needs and giving them room to express something that would normally be like, well, it seems sort of boring to me, but I'll let them express something. And in that, I may hear actually something very interesting.
That, I think what you mentioned before is something that when we're first learning type and understanding how powerful it can be, we have a tendency to want to use it. I mean, you know, we have a hammer, so all the world's a nail. And the idea that you just mentioned, you're like, well, I don't really do it with family. I don't feel like I should have to. And I don't really use these methodologies with people who know I have INTJ preferences, right? Like at a type conference or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they're going to give me space to be me. So it's this idea that it's a tool that is useful in context where you're maybe already having struggle with a conversation, or it's not like the thing that you should immediately be rushing to and trying to gamify everybody and trying to like, you know, like engineer a situation. It's more like, well, if I'm struggling to build rapport, what's going on here, right? And with my family, I shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah. So one specific example comes to mind where knowledge of type and thinking about language in particular, because I imagine the people watching, they do want to know like specific tips for specific functions. And I was sitting with my dad and my stepmother, and there was something that had happened in the past, and she was very upset about it, and she was blaming my dad and I. I mean, everybody can relate to this kind of situation regardless of which parent. And she has, or had, she's passed away now, ESFP preferences. And, you know, I know something about type in general. Like ESFP is a type that pays attention to physical sensory cues. They pay attention to the nonverbal cues. They're paying attention to how people feel. And like if you hug somebody and you close your eyes when you hug them, that's different than when you keep your eyes open. Okay, that kind of thing is like, those are all tells to them. And from my point of view, I really believe that I was not guilty and not involved with the thing that she's describing, that she was complaining about. And yet in her mind, she was just like on this warpath. And I specifically said, listen to the tone of my voice. Do I sound like I'm lying about it? And she stopped in her tracks. And she's like, no. And she completely laid off of me. And like 5 minutes later, she's like, oh, you can go. And then she like, I don't know, she and my dad argued for like another hour or something. Because I'm like, oh, he doesn't know how to deal with her. But that was an example where just thinking about what does ESFP respond to, and voice tone is a very important element.
Yeah. So I think that there is you're right. I think people need practical pieces, and I think we should probably move into that and talk about some maybe ways to communicate with each. We can talk about it through the lens of functions or type, but I think that laying down that principle of using type discreetly and judiciously, like not using it like a fire hose and blasting everybody all the time and being like, I know type, so I can game anybody, right? I'll be able to size up the situation and I'll be able to persuade anybody to do anything I want.
Pick
them
up
to.
dates.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Not that type can't be used for that.
Oh, it's I think it can be very effective for that. And also, there is something to be said for sort of understanding that this is a helper. It's like when you're using language to help build rapport with different types, when you're sort of understanding somebody's cognition and using specific trigger words to help them understand or to grease the wheels of a situation. I think we should lay down that it should be used always for good and not for evil, and not something that you're trying to like game your family around or game the people in your life around.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is some degree that we do want to game the people around us. I mean, we have to be honest. Like, I want better results to the things I talk to my boss about or my coworkers. We are in a way gaming this.
Yeah, but it's going for win-win rather than I win and you lose.
Of course.
Yes.
But I think there is some. I hate to be a false front on persuasion or manipulating the environment around me, because I think we all want that more. That's what we're looking for, is to be able to do that. But you're right, a win-win. I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier that triggered something for me. You said, I don't want to talk to anybody that's a dumb version of their type. And we could look at this in two ways. One way is the person's like literally not intelligent. Like, they don't have the cognition to have an intelligent conversation. I find that most people... It's not, I mean, there are people that are just not smart. I find there's people that are unattuned.
So that's actually what I mean. Yes.
Like you can't have a conversation with them because they're so busy, or they're vibrating at such a high vibration of like they're focused up here, frenetic. They can't come down and have a real conversation with you. I find this to be like 99% of the people I engage with in life. Like, there's very rare I can have a real conversation with a person. Even people that are, somewhat deep in all of this. And it's really challenging for me, and you've really surprised me, Antonia, in a lot of ways, when you'll converse with somebody and somehow you're able to get them into a more real place almost immediately, but sometimes you struggle with it too. Like my family, for example, if you talk to my family, you're usually talking in a very thinker way, a very intuitive thinker way. You're coming with a lot of data, a lot of facts and figures. And I'm looking at my family going, they don't care about anything you're saying right now. Like, they just want to have an emotional connection or vibe, right? Like, and I know that about them. So I don't even attempt to communicate like more than like real basic principles or some emotional communication. Like, I don't want to call it dumbing it down, but I make it accessible. And it's very rare I find myself in a position where someone could actually deal with what I really want to tell. Not like hard truths, but the information I want to communicate. So I found I kind of go through life meeting people where they're at, taking what they're giving me, and then responding in kind, trying to guess, okay, this person can hear about this threshold of communication from me. And they need to have it packaged in this way. And it's a little frustrating, but also it's, and I think it's getting worse because we're so distracted as humans. I don't think it's getting better at all. So when we talk about how to communicate with every personality type, I think the idea of listening is important, because we're listening to how this person is already sending signals to us. And often I've found in my life that when somebody's talking to me, I go, okay, that's the level they're at. This is how they're giving me information. This is the kind of place I need to meet them. It's very rare I can bring them to a different place from that, but I can meet them at that level. So I think listening is important. But what would you speak to, especially the two of you as intuitive thinkers? I mean, I'm guessing I'm going to ask you this. You're going to say, yeah, absolutely. It's got to be maddening moving through the world when most people just want an emotional solution, connection, a vibe. It actually doesn't have to do with the data at all for most people you engage with. How have you, maybe there's an intuitive thinker listening right now, how have you dealt with that in your lives? Like, how do you go through the world not just feeling like I'm so alone, I can't communicate with anybody?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to emphasize, as you said, that it's not about education level, social class, anything like that. Like, I can actually encounter somebody who has no education, lives on a rural farm, is not knowledgeable about the big world or whatever it is. And that person is really fascinating, like fun person to hang out with. Yeah. Even if they're not like my vibe or my thing, I'm like, I'm here now. And I'm sure that they have a human story that's there. What I don't like, I think, and this is the introverted feeling side of me, is like hypocrisy, just delusional, And many times those are people who are, as my grandmother would say, ESTJ, educated beyond their intelligence. That's probably the group that annoys me the most. People who are hypocrites, just live in a fantasy world. That's specifically what I mean. Now, when I was young, I would say like early teenager, I realized, most people, they're not interested in what I have to say. And certainly I kept that through college. And finally I was just like, you know what, that's actually fine. I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
And there are other things to talk about. So I was thinking a little bit when I visited my dad recently, and all the people I was hanging out with him were sensing preference. And I was thought like, oh, maybe it's going to be sort of awkward, like there's nothing going to be to talk about or whatever. That's not true at all. Like we all had a great interaction the whole time. And it's like just being in the moment and just being like, oh, how is your food? And that sounds like very mundane in a way. But as long as we're paying attention, there's actually stuff to joke about. Like there's little insights about the person and what they value and like what is meaningful to them. You learn something about their story of where they came from. You give them space to tell a story from their past, especially old folks. Like I'm not a big person to hang out with old folks, but when I do, I'm like, they have a whole life worth of stories. Can I be there to hear a story that is not, like a superficial thing? Like when I was in the war or when this happened or that happened. So I made a decision that like I don't need to have big discussions with people. It's great when we do, but I also don't need that. And I just decided to put that aside. Now, do I have issues? Yes, I do expect in a work environment that the person can keep up conceptually, because it's like our job to do that. And I'm like, maybe you've assigned me the wrong person to work with. Or just like communication is unclear and all over the place. It just gets annoying. So that's sort of like my journey with it. And I did realize as a teacher, I needed to incorporate, yes, concepts. That's what college is about. Live group experiences. So it's action, stories, and metaphor. Whether personal stories, anecdotes, research studies that reveal this and that, funny little things, cartoons even. And then, be able to talk about in the course, like emphasize, like actually memorizing and practicing is important. So I made an effort of talking to the 4 temperaments. And I think that way you can really, connect with almost anybody. Whether I want to or not, that's a different situation.
Do you have a meta goal when you talk to people that you're after? Like I'm realizing as I'm thinking about this myself as an example, I realize, and I don't know if you do, Antonia, I have the goal of, I want this person to feel amazing in my presence. That's my meta goal. It's actually less about the information. Now, if the information will serve that, I'm realizing that's my motivation going into something. Now, I'm an ENFP preferences. Of course, that's going to be my meta goal, right? Like, of course I'm going to want that.
Yeah.
But do you have like a sense of like what you want the experience of communicating with another person to be?
So my natural inclination, as I learned from acting prep class, and I could see it, is to check off the boxes to move things along. That literally is like just like the practical thing to do. And I mean, even outside of a work situation, like what is the goal in this context? What is the goal in that context? Like do the things that needed to get done. Like do it in a fun way, but that's it.
So the other night when you, me, Antonia, and my kids are sitting around watching YouTube clips together, we're laughing. You're actually thinking like as we're communicating to each other and stuff, you're like, I'm checking off a box to get something done.
No, so I'm just saying like originally I would think like that.
Oh, okay. That's your original.
Yes,
gotcha,
yeah. Now it's simply to be in the present moment, and there should be no agenda. Okay. In fact, if I sense myself having an agenda, then I can be a little bit critical of myself because I'm like, why am I having an agenda in this situation? And I don't even want to give off that vibe. So it really is just about being me, having no agenda, having a good experience with each other, and being perfectly fine whenever my off-ramp comes or the other person's off-ramp comes from the conversational highway. And that's, I mean, obviously something like a business negotiation, there has to be a specific goal, right? But even then, it's like to be jovial, to be friendly, that kind of thing. I mean, in some cases that hasn't served me well because there are... I mean, I can think of a few people over the years, especially when I was teaching, the administrators who were just highly unethical people who had bad agendas, and being present with them like serves nobody's purpose. Like it's, in some way it's like either to be hostile with them or to just be completely neutral but playing the chess game. And I'm not like that. Like, I'm not the INTP or ISTP or whatever. It's like, here's the chess. I mean, I understand people say, oh, INTJs think in terms of like everything is a game of chess. And I get that. But I'm like, I'm going to lose against these people because I'm in a weak position. I'm a pawn and they're a rook.
Yeah.
And we're just being used by the system. So like, why bother even participating in that?
Yeah.
In that sense, a lot of times I'm like, I'm just going to exit the chessboard. And I'm a very big advocate of not playing into other people's games. Yeah. And that's another example, the irritating fellow NT who tries to keep getting me to play their chess game. Not interested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, truly not interested. We'll just like turn around and be like, no.
I think that's why earlier, because you're totally right, Joel. I mean, when I was like, we don't want to game it here, but you're like, well, no, I mean, like sometimes you are in a game, right? Sometimes you are like trying to move something along and trying to persuade somebody of something. And I think my like let's set a ground rule that we don't use this for evil. I think what it is more is I think there's a difference between understanding that all of life can be seen as a game, right? Like we're all kind of sort of playing the game of life versus always trying to maneuver yourself in a power position so that you can be dominant in every situation and using type to dominate over others. And that particular game, which I think our fellow NTs have a tendency to go into type realizing that is one way in which it can be used and then pursuing that path. I as an NT type and understanding that that's a way it can go, it's almost like I want to make sure I distance myself from that concept, even though you're totally right. Like there is ways to use it in our behalf and, for persuasion.
I know what you meant though.
Yeah.
Don't use it for evil.
Yeah. Like try not to harm others with it. It could be a tool, for good or for evil. But I was ruminating, like it makes total sense that you're like, originally it was to move things along and now it's to be present. You're like, it's for you, it's to make the person feel amazing. And
what's yours? What's your meta goal?
Well, I think it is to learn and teach. Like whenever I'm engaged with another person, I'm always learning. I'm always trying to figure out what it is that what thought they have that I haven't had yet, right? Like almost mining other people's brains for gold. And it doesn't matter who that person is. They almost always have something that I don't have yet. And I've noticed that other people who have other TPs like that use introverted thinking, because what I'm talking about is a very introverted thinking way of looking at social engagements or interactions, is we'll sit there for like an hour. I mean, not if we're young and impatient, by the way, right? Some INTP is going to be like, or ENTP is like, I can't do that. But it's like, once you learn patience, you can. But if you know that somebody is a trusted source of information or has gold, you'll sit there and listen to like something that's 90% of what you already know, just to get that 10% of gold. And I'll do that in interactions. Like somebody has something that I haven't thought yet. And whether or not I adopt it, I just want to hear it. I just want to hear it and ruminate over it and think about it and try to figure out if it fits in my worldview. And so every single person is kind of everybody has something. They have that's not entirely true. That's an idealistic way of saying it. Most people have something. There are some people who don't, but most people do. And so there's a little part of my extroverted feeling, my 10-year-old or tertiary function, that just likes to vibe with another person and see if I can get them in a vibe. And once I can get them in a vibe and sort of bring them in, and I think the reason why I'm able to get them to that place of real is because I'm trying to bring them down to the most honest place so that they will give me their honest thoughts. Yeah. Because that's where the gold is. That's where the true, real sort of digital representations of their worldview can be found. And that's where they'll surprise me. That's where I'll get something that's true.
You do that by offering first, I think. Like you give them what's true for you, core principle wise, or the truth of your thoughts. Like you take the bravery first. And some people won't dance with you on that, I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, some people are really weirded out by it. I do sort of tend to use that concept of reciprocity a lot. If you offer first, other people almost feel an obligation to give back. But I don't think that they feel an obligation so much as most people, when they're around somebody who will say truths, feel a sense of relief. Yeah. Like they kind of rest into it. They're like, oh, I can be honest here. And when I'm honest, the person will hold space for my honesty. It does weird some people out, though. They think that you're trying to pick their brain or something.
Yeah. I feel that introverted feeling does a bit of the same thing, but it's not at the level of concepts. It's like, are you showing me your actual humanity?
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, like, what are we doing? Like, why even bother?
I resonate with that.
Yeah. And now to go back to your original question, it didn't quite pop to mind, but now looking at it, it's like very obvious. So throughout my life, the theme still in every situation is I'm going to experience something. And then afterwards, whether it was positive or negative, whatever it is how can I reframe that so that it's a learning lesson that helps me grow? I think in practice, that is what I do all the time. And so even if something is really terrible experience, is like, what was the positive thing in it? That even if it means like, I will never repeat this is like a very basic thing to watch for, whatever it is. It's like there's always that reframe. I think sometimes that's got me into trouble because I'm a little bit too optimistic about an experience. Because many times it's like if you're in a business environment, things doesn't just happen once. It happens many times.
Yeah.
And each time I go away like reframing it as something positive. And I tried to explain to someone once, an ISFP, like who knew type, and I'm like, I'm a very optimistic person. And he's like, no, you're not. And I'm like, yes, I am. And I said, the big difference is that I always see the potential for progress or growth, and that I believe that people can do that. Like, I really believe that. In fact, my problem is that I forget that people don't want to.
Yeah.
And that he was somebody who often complained about he was in a negative space, not because of his type, but about the past. And I'm like, actually, you're the one who's very pessimistic because you believe you're stuck.
Yeah.
And so there is, I think, this very fundamental introverted intuiting theme of like, how can I reframe it or step out of the frame in order to learn something from it and to grow?
Yeah. As I'm listening to both of you talk about this, I'm realizing that it actually is not my goal. As I'm reflecting on my own motivations, it's not my goal to feel or have the other person feel good in my presence. It's to have the other person feel good in my presence so I can feel good. I'm actually realizing it's even deeper than the other person. It's, if I can make this person have a good experience, then I have a good experience and I feel good throughout my life, every encounter I have. And I think as we talked about the first blush, we kind of gave our first answers and then we realized there's a level deeper, like you talked about just now. It's actually about your ability to reframe what what the goodness could be out of something is what you're actually looking for from your encounters. You're looking to learn and teach, but to probably learn even more than teach. You actually learn by teaching, and I'm looking to feel good by helping other people feel good.
I'm very fortunate that I get a lot of opportunities to teach, though.
Yes.
I think I don't think other ENTPs get as many opportunities. So I think that's why they enter social situations almost like
trolling,
like bottlenecked.
Yeah, they're desperate to engage in that.
Yeah, they're desperate to do, and teaching is it's rewarding to ENTP types in a way that's kind of difficult to communicate, I think, to other types. Like, we get something out of it that's really fundamental to us. Probably because introverted thinking, they call it that parent function. So it's like part of how we feel like we contribute to the world. But we also, I learn as I'm talking. Like, I get to hear what I'm about to say. And then when I say it, I get to realize that either I figured that out on the fly or I already knew it, but I wasn't able to access it through silence. Like, there's a bunch of information in my head that I don't get to access until I'm talking, right? Because my introverted sensing is fourth function. And so that's the function that allows me to go inside and like sort of access all the cold experiences and memories and all the things I know. And it's like, silence is a very difficult way for me to go access that stuff, right? I have to be working on a problem with introverted thinking and figuring it out and sort of having an inner dialogue, sort of creating distinctions, or I need to be saying it. And so teaching another person is as rewarding an experience as I think I have. And maybe other ENTPs don't feel this way, but I suspect most of us do.
I mean, and it's to sort of work off both of what you said. So one thing I really loved in the years I was teaching is to be able to set up experiences for people. So experiential learning, for a couple of reasons. One is that, students complain about their other classes. I think a lot of, especially when I was teaching in social science, I'm like, they're learning sort of useless stuff. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just useless. What's a way to bypass all of that? And I can't necessarily trust everything I know is true, but what I can do is create experiences for people, to create a frame around it, and then to help facilitate what happens inside of that. And one of my favorite moments in teaching was when a student who had ENFP preferences, because we did type over several courses, and he was a senior by then, and he came up to me, and so we had been outdoors for 75 minutes, and there's this whole, like, the students are running around and interacting with each other, and they're following these little cards, and it's basically like a live group simulation. And he came up to me and he said, "Professor, like, don't take this the wrong way, but I just realized, based on the way everyone behaved here, that everything I've learned in the past 4 years is wrong." And I was so stoked to hear that. Mm-hmm. For me, that's like victory as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he didn't mean my class, fortunately. But for me, it's like, it's creating that frame for people to have their experiences.
Yeah.
And that's not something necessarily that happens in a social, like going to a party or something like that. Right. It could be in like setting up and hosting something. But for the most part, I enjoyed that in my work. But there was a lot of things built in that you've mentioned, like there's the mentor-mentee, student-teacher kind of dynamic that I think a lot of NTs resonate with, just inherently. Even if they're not teachers, they may be mentors or something like that. Whereas like NFs, for example, love like the romantic companion the role, like concept. And I think that for various types, there are sort of, or temperaments, function pairs that they really gravitate towards those. And if you come up and you're talking about communicating with people, if you happen to fall into one of those, then that really can be like the person is just projecting onto you and like wants you to fulfill the role and wants to have communication. And then the question is like, are you actually communicating, or is it you're just sharing projections with each other?
Yeah. I do want to make a clarification when I say it's like special for ENTPs to teach. I think all types are teachers, and they all find reward in teaching in different contexts. ENTPs tend to fit the know-it-all teacher archetype. Like we just sort of show up, like just
your words.
Yeah. No, I know. I've said this many times on the podcast. I'm a know-it-all teacher. I know that. And so it's hard to not create every single interaction into that, right? Unless you're just hanging out with your friends and like laughing about something or joking or bantering or in rapport. It's hard to still the compulsion of turning every interaction into some sort of like teaching lesson.
Oh, and in fact, this is when I'm with somebody who very well meaningly in a social situation brings up that Dario does this or Dario does that, or heaven forbid, like my parents, I'm mortified, not because I know it's a danger for me to suddenly start talking, and it's like, I'm not going to shut up.
Right,
because
exactly.
you like, don't open that door, don't open it. Like, I'm doing perfectly fine on the own. Yes.
Yeah. Pandora's box has been opened.
Yes,
no.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm very fortunate that I get a microphone on a regular basis. So all of that ENTP compulsion to constantly and perpetually be outputting, and like teaching, that's very well sated. And so because of that, when I go into social interactions, I don't feel that sense of urgency. And so I can kick over more into what can I learn from this person? What can I receive? Yeah. What do they have to offer me? And so I think that might be, for those of you who are ENTPs out there, if your breastfit type is ENTP, maybe that's a pro tip.
Well, and this is something, so my dad taught me this when I was a kid. He worked with youth, like he had a youth organization that he and my mother ran. And when there was a kid that was a troublemaker in any situation, he would often say, that's a kid right there that has leadership qualities that isn't able to act upon them. And so they're causing trouble because they have a need or a desire to take initiative, to take the lead, to help orchestrate something. And so I've noticed that that's a pattern that applies to a lot more than just leadership. So I see NTs, for example, but particularly NTPs coming onto like online forums and correcting everybody, or giving the real data, coming in, having debates or arguments. I interpret that, this is a person that has a desire to lead or teach or to contribute. They don't have a platform like you do, Antonia. So they're going to come in and find any avenue they can to release this energy of wanting to contribute. They're actually not trying to be a troll. I mean, maybe some people are, but I think most people in those environments aren't trying to be harmful, be damaging. They don't know what to do with this energy they have. They haven't created a context that's healthy for its expression. And so it comes out in these ways that are frustrating to the rest of us. We're like, would you please stop, like correcting everything I say in a conversation, or come making those comments or this video, or whatever it would be. And so I think if you're listening right now, one thing you can do is just observe the things that are annoying to you by other people you're communicating with, and say, what is it that they're actually expressing here? What is the energy that they can't maybe have a healthy expression for, or a proper expression, quote unquote, whatever that means. And this is the only avenue they have. And I can just give them some grace, because this is them attempting to contribute in whatever way they know how to. I think that's a huge shift that I took in my life that gave me the ability to extend generosity to others.
And if we want to sort of create a connection back to what ostensibly our original topic was.
I'm getting ready to do that in a second.
Okay, I was going to say, we can just sort of like loop back to where we were before, which was about talking to the different types. And I think when I talk to thinkers, I know that they are very satisfied when I ask their opinions on things.
Yeah.
Well, how do you think this thing is?
You're getting the technique. Hold on. I want to just make one more comment real quick.
Okay.
Why are we talking, if you're listening or watching right now, why are we talking about our response to communication? Like, why are we even talking about that first before we give advice? Because you're here for the techniques, I'm sure. You're here for the advice. You're like, yes, episode, like we're minutes in, like a long period of time in, and I haven't gotten the juice yet. Where's the actual advice you guys can give me to talk? I think the principle here is self-awareness and understanding how you hear things first. Like, where you are the instrument first when you're communicating with other people. How do you interpret things? How are you showing up? What's your meta goal in communication? Because everybody's got one of these. So you can start with the self. Observe yourself and say, what is it that I'm looking for in communication? When am I contributing in all of these things first? And then you can say, okay, now everybody's got one of those. Now, how can I communicate with other people on their terms? So that's why I think we ended up talking a lot about our response to communication in the initial part of this show. Now let's transition into some techniques and actual specifics.
That was beautiful. That was a beautiful segue. I'm so sorry that I almost took it from you.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm so glad you said it. Well, to go back to what you're talking about, and we've kind of maybe circled the drain on NTs a little too long, but I would say that for thinking types, oftentimes asking their thoughts, asking their opinions, asking them how they see the world, getting them talking on subjects that they have a passion around. That is something that I don't think thinking types get to experience that often.
I have a secret, by the way.
Yeah.
On thinking types. Ask them a question they can answer brilliantly. They will love you forever. Guaranteed.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with this terrible, terrible boredom, Joel? When they start talking about
choose your subject wisely, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Make sure you like the person first.
Yeah. And in this case, it's not just NT. So if you get together some, say, ISTPs, and all of a sudden it's talking about, like my brother has 3 cars, and he absolutely loves to go out and show me and others his, especially if he happened once to have 2 cars there at the same time at this event. I don't know how that happened. And just like all the features of the cars and so on. And I'm like, I don't completely not appreciate it, but I'm like, I don't need an hour of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just like, do you enjoy driving it? And like, what is the gas mileage? And like, I am interested in what he did personally to improve his car or whatever. Not the details of it, but the fact that he did that, I'm like, oh, that's really cool.
Right. So it's almost like finding an intersection of interest.
Yes.
It's like, okay, what can you answer brilliantly? And then how can I get the thing that's interesting to me also in there? Yeah. Which is the personal story, which is more interesting to you.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, on the subject, of course, I'm very interested in. If we wanted to talk about like the possibilities and ways we could do terraforming on Mars, I could go on for a while about that. And I don't need any stories with it. Yes. Anyway. The 4 functions or 8 functions.
Yeah.
So do we want to start with one of them? And
like we keep hijacking your ability to just throughline this, Antonia. So
well, I was going to say we've already talked about thinking, so why don't we just break that up a little bit and then go to feeling, and then maybe talk a little bit about intuiting and sensing. Okay. So I do believe a general rule for thinkers is get them to talk about something that they can be brilliant at. I think that's a general statement. So what would you say is a distinction between, say, talking to somebody using introverted thinking, which are TPs, and somebody using extroverted thinking, which are TJs?
Well, I do find TJs fairly easy, and it's laying things out in a linear way. giving a rationale that's connected to some kind of evidence, talking about things like effectiveness. Whereas I know like a TP, I said something about like, is the policy, I'm like, I sort of think about which policies are effective in terms of like voting or something like that. And he's like, but how do you even define effectiveness? I'm like, that's sort of a bullshitty question. To be honest, it's like, it's a weasel question, because it's like effectiveness is like, you have a goal, like reduce homelessness in the city. Like either the policy works more or it works less. Like it's just really as simple as that. And everything else is like overcomplicating it. So I think for the TJ types, there really is this bottom line. Like, what is the evidence? How is it functional, or how functional is it? Where are the parts that are broken? What can we do to fix it? There's a sort of time and task kind of things, but I think a lot of it is still, and I want to emphasize this, I don't believe that any type or function has a corner on empathy or thinking about others.
I agree.
Because thinking types in general do think very much, even this is reflected in the MBTI questions, about fairness. Mm-hmm. Not like, do you feel it's fair, but is it actually fair?
Yeah.
And that's, and many times the fairness is about like equal playing field, for example. Does everybody have the opportunity to participate? Is everybody able to speak? Whatever it is. And then of course there's a certain functionality and effectiveness down the road. Like if that's not enough, then what? But to me, now when I encounter someone with introverted thinking preference, it's so interesting because sometimes we can gel really well. But there's always that point past which I like can't go any further. And then there are times when it's just like, it's a no-go. And usually it's a no-go when either I feel that the person is just being, especially for NTPs, they're just being jokey. Like it's actually not a serious conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's fine, but then I'm not going to go down that road. And I know that they're still using introverted thinking with it. They're just trying to make it fun. And I'm like, I'm not in the mood for fun right now. I mean, sometimes I am. Then there are others when it's like, the paradigm I just like don't agree with. Mm-hmm. I'm like, your paradigm is out of touch with the facts on the ground. And then that's very difficult. And then the other one is they have simply reached a level of application with TI that I can't do. So I'm working for a time with ENTP actually in Norway. And there were technical problems. And it was amazing that he could like work that technical problem in his head like this. And I can do that to a certain extent, but he was better at it. Yeah. And it had nothing to do with the base level of knowledge. We both had the base level of knowledge we needed. I could simply see he's using NE and TI together in a way that's Yeah. And then with STPs, I mean, that's a whole other thing because they're introverted thinking, I just need to boil it down. So boil it down for that ESTP. Like my entire paragraph needs to be 5 words. Yeah. And I can't always do that. Yeah. In that case, then I have to appeal to extroverted sensing, weirdly, and it'd just be like talking about an experience is a way to bridge it. And that level of nuts and bolts just isn't me. And it's very difficult with STPs because they also can talk and do something like problem solving with their hands simultaneously. And I can't do that. Like I will make a mistake. Yeah. And so there are certain limits. And so it's not like I don't understand what you're doing or something like that. Like I simply can't keep up in the way that they do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so funny. I actually just had an example of this that you're talking about with an INTJ on Twitter. Because I made a top level post. You and I were talking about cloning, right? You were like, I just need to clone myself so I can get all my stuff done. And so I've been thinking about it today. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty busy too. A clone would be awesome. And then I'm like, but my clone would totally, I made the tweet that my clone would immediately tell me to go screw myself, run my pockets, and then go backpacking in New Zealand. Yeah. Because I know my clone would do that.
The rebellious clone.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the top level tweet, the original tweet was clearly not serious, right? But then an INTJ popped on and started taking it seriously, right? It was like, well, but like they would have a different soul than you. And then like, because they could be an ISTJ They could be a version of you that's an ISTJ that would get more stuff done. And I'm like, well, how would that work? Do I have to get like an ISTJ's DNA and like sort of like turn it into some sort of like, and then I said, and then how does one juice an ISTJ? Because I'm still being funny, right? I'm still like in the space.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you could still, and then, I mean, it's just, he's opening it up to this very serious conversation about whether or not souls would also transfer and cloning. And then I made a post under his that effectively said like, so an ENTP makes a statement about how my clone would be an asshole. The INTJ comes and starts a serious conversation about souls.
Yeah.
And then now as an ENTP, I'm in this dilemma. Do I start going down the road of how souls work with this INTJ, or do I keep it light and funny like the original intent? And I was like, well, I got too much to do today, so I'm just going to have to, I can't talk about souls. But it's so funny how like the INTJ is just like, yeah, let's talk about this thing that this light thing, and then like go down the serious road. So I have the opposite experience of you, right? You're like, the INTP just wants to make it funny. And I'm like, the INTJ is so serious.
Yeah.
So not always, obviously, but I think with introverted thinking, my experience of that is when you said, you know, like, well, how do you define effectiveness? Like immediately, I'm sure my brain would have lit up under an EEG. I'm like, yeah, let's define effectiveness. So I think being clear on definitions and just getting in a conversation about how to define something. I know that sounds really silly and pedantic, but honestly, like,
how does that get anything
don't
done?
you know from context what I mean? Like, do we need to stop and define everything?
It's actually not a pushback against what you've said. It's,
right? No, I'm just that's what I would think.
It's completely depersonalized. You used a word, and that person grabbed the word and shoved it over here, and then started studying it. And I think that's what introverted thinking does.
But it's the taking it and shoving it over here that I find so odd. And this is an example where an ESFP and I were sitting together with an ESFJ. The ESFP and the ESFJ got in a huge argument because the ESFP is using words in a way that the ESFJ was like, well, that word doesn't mean that in the dictionary.
Right.
And the ESFP is like, well, you know from what I was talking about that I obviously meant this.
Right.
And I think that there's an ability with TEFI to just be like, this word means this in this context. And the moment you take it out of the context is when you get into trouble.
Well, and I don't even think, I mean, I think that's more of an extroverted thinking thing to see it in context. I think with introverted feeling, it's about the intent. What was my intent? Can you meet me halfway?
Yes, and there is that side too.
And
yes,
so
yeah.
let's just...
Why can't you see my intent?
You got what I meant, right?
Yeah, you got what I...
Exactly.
And no, that was very much his response. He's like, well, and then he felt like you're deliberately like painting me as a bad person.
Yeah.
When obviously I didn't intend it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, that's actually the ESFP. That's exactly how I read what he said.
Yeah.
And then it becomes an interesting, and then I knew ESFJ, ESFP, so close and yet so far.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally different things. So I think I have learned that when I'm talking to people who use introverted feeling is I have to meet them halfway with intent. What was their intent? And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll re-articulate it. I'll say, what I hear you saying is, and then I'll re-articulate what they said, and I try to be more precise, like to understand it in a way that like meets us both in the middle. And oftentimes the person will be like, yes, that's exactly what I meant, right? And so it's not a matter of saying that doesn't mean that, right? That's a very challenging position to take. I think I don't recommend introverted thinking users challenge everybody all the time, even though that is an instinct. It's more re-expressing in a way that they'll feel relieved that somebody understood them enough to be able to articulate it better than they even did. And I found that to be very, very effective no matter what type I'm talking to. So that said, we're talking about how to talk the types, Dario, not how extroverted thinking finds introverted thinking frustrating.
So can I say, I'll give an example of interacting with FPs and introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling. And then you as a FI user. It's sometimes an FP, and I think they do this in a way as a test, but also slightly as a compliment. They will throw something out which is very provocative. That I don't mean like a political opinion or something. I mean, they in the moment will be like, they're just going to name something that's like going on emotionally, or they're going to share something about their life. Like I'm hearing from an FP friend and I'm like, oh, how are you doing today? And he's like, well, my wife and I just broke up. And it's sort of like out of nowhere and just dumped on me. And some people would be like, oh, what is the correct response? And this and that. And I've gotten more challenges than that where an FP suddenly breaks, like they break the fourth wall, basically. like what is supposed to be like the conversationally appropriate thing, and then they're just going to run right over that, and they know that they are. And I'm like, yeah, I know how to meet that. Thanks. And it is very evocative, and they're trying to see, can we just get past all the BS and like get to the real person?
Yeah.
And they want to see, can I handle being the real person? And with them, otherwise they would be like, why am I wasting my time? And I think it can work in both directions. So when I'm with somebody who has FP preferences and I see a certain behavior or they want something, to get down to, it's like, well, what do I really see going on with them? And unlike an FJ, I can actually name that. And if it is the truth, they will not be insulted, even though it might be inappropriate or something like that. So I remember telling ENFP, who's been very disruptive in a conversation, I literally said, you're just being this way because you're bored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All the disruptive behavior immediately ended.
Yeah.
And he became like a normal person. Yeah. And I didn't say it in a nasty way, but it really was just like that. And so I'm like, yeah, the FP sometimes can be very direct.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
My difficulty with folks with a feeling preference is when they take something that's clearly based in feeling and they try and dress it up in thinking. And I'm like, no, don't do that. It's like, no, it doesn't work. Like, just go back to just say that you're for this because you feel it's right.
Yeah.
Or you had a personally good experience in the case of SFs. Otherwise, it's just, don't dress it up with reasons because you're never, like, those aren't going to fly with me.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that feelers do that because they're so frequently demanded.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Do that. And
yes.
so they think that that's what they have to do. It's actually very surprising when a feeler says, because I just feel like, I just do. And the other person goes, okay. Yeah. Like that's enough.
Yeah.
That's validating enough because you feel it. And being in a relationship.
We all have that. Sometimes we're just like, I don't feel like that today.
Yeah.
Just say that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the other thing about introverted feeling, though, if you want to get to the real, is I think sometimes introverted feeling is intentionally not I wouldn't say antagonistic, but kind of provocative is a good word. I have noticed that with introverted feeling types, they almost want you to prove that you're willing to go all the way to them, almost to gain their trust.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, well,
fight for the right to help me.
Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying it, but yeah, fight for the right. Like, fight through all my resistances, even though I want you to come through and help me or contribute in this way. I want you to fight through all my resistances, synthetic resistances that I'm throwing up, just to prove that you really want to do this.
Yeah,
I want to see your motivation come through.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is truly what you want. And if you really want it, you'll fight hard for it. And so I think sometimes people who use introverted feeling.
No, and it's so for those of you who have Dom FI teenage children, for example, out there, or maybe that's your type preference, someone, they will do things that are deliberately like truly try their parents' patience, like get into trouble with the law or whatever, simply as a test to see, do my parents actually love me? But like, what does this mean anyway? And they may do this with the partner too. Like, I'm going to suddenly be horrible one day just to see how they respond to it. And it's not like they planned that in advance. Is like they are horrible. Like, they just feel bad one day and they're like, I'm going to stop pretending today and I'm going to be me. I'm going to do me. And if they can't handle that, then obviously we're not really in sync with each other.
Yeah. Well, TJs will do this too. Anybody who has introverted feeling as one of their first four functions will sometimes do this, especially as teenagers.
Yeah.
Like, I think your ESTJ son recently tested you to see what you would do.
Yeah.
And you wanted to make sure that you'd be there for him, that you would do the right thing for him. And so I think those tests are not uncommon. I think extroverted feeling also does tests. Yeah, it's a little different. But I think with extroverted, one of the things that's nice about extroverted feeling is that, and this is what they know about themselves.
These are all FJs.
These are FJs. And we have this too as TPs, right? Those of us who have extroverted feeling is one of our first 4 functions. But the challenge with extroverted feeling is all you have to do is get in sync with it. Like, there's not a very specific way of talking to them in specific words. It's more like, are you in rapport? Are you in an energetic vibe with the person? And I think extroverted feeling, this is why they're always complaining about boundaries and really struggling with like people taking advantage of them, and why they use group protection, right? Especially if they're like a group of people, like maybe a group of women, going clubbing or something. They really protect each other.
Yeah.
Because they know how vulnerable they are to somebody that they're in a vibe with. And so to talk to somebody who has extroverted feeling in a positive way, non-evilly, right? Not to exploit. But what that idea of getting into vibe can almost be just sort of like facing them with your body, sort of face each other, making eye contact, looking like you're truly interested, asking questions about them, like what's going on, and then just kind of getting in this sort of, this back and forth rapport.
This is so hard for me.
Of course it is.
No, it's not that I can't get in rapport. I truly don't want to. I consider it dangerous.
Well, I mean, they know it's dangerous too, right? Because all of a sudden you're handing energy over to the other person and absorbing theirs.
Are you talking about anybody or particularly FJs?
I'm talking about FJs.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm talking about particularly FJs because I'm like, the hidden agenda is that we're all going to think and feel the same thing. And when there's that vibe thing. And my most sacred thing is like, I get to think and feel for myself. Thank you. And so when I'm feeling this pressure to get in sync. Now, I mean, there's a superficial way to do it. You go to a family gathering, like everybody's behaving a certain way. There's some FJs. That's fine. Like whatever. But there's a certain point past which is like, you're just trying to rope me into whatever it is that you want or need. And sometimes I know how to respond to that. And I can just say like something like, "Oh, I really appreciate you," or whatever. Like I search for the authenticity, my authentic interaction that's positive. Because in any interaction, there's going to be some positive and negative things I feel about the same person. So I search for the positive thing to say that's supportive of them, and then I'm like, okay, and then that's part of me releasing it. And then that's and I saw this once years ago in graduate school. I went to a house party. That gal, I'm sure there was this gal who was ENTP preferences, and she was interested in me, and we're talking, and then I'm like, I need to go home, and I have an exam tomorrow, and I'm not really that interested in her, and so she decides to dial up the dumb blonde, and not all at once, but like slowly as I'm leaving, and like she goes further and further, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, do you think that's what I want? Because then there could be like, FJs can also do that. They're going to think like, oh, this person wants this. And I'm like, why would you think I would want that? Like, that's like, no, just go back to the person that you actually are. And so I think that can happen too. So that's, and I'm not defending against that. I just thought that like, oh, that's sort of sad. Like the person feels like they have to change their own, the FJ has to change their own energy, even to something that's very alien from them. In order to get the attention of somebody else.
Well, and that might be because there was actually an ENTP, and extroverted feeling is childlike.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
and so I think an FJ type usually can figure out not to constantly perpetually be a chameleon, especially if it's a first function. I think they can figure that out. But I think what I've tapped into, and I'll go ahead and be the advocate for the FJ that isn't sitting here, right? Because we've got all the other judging functions represented. Yeah. So since it's my 10-year-old tertiary function, I'll represent. I think most of the time, extroverted feeling just wants to know that you want to be in rapport with them. Now, I know it feels like there's a hidden agenda of everybody has to sync up with thoughts. But I think what I've come to understand is one of the reasons why the introverted thinking function is low with extroverted feeling being high is we actually can't all get in sync with our thoughts if our thoughts are too specific. Right? Because we're all going to, at the end of the day, 100% of human beings are going to disagree with 100% of human beings about something. So if we can keep the topic at a place that we can all agree,
access.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Then we can stay in that vibe, and we can stay in rapport, and we can stay reinforcing that we like and love each other. And I think that's actually kind of the end game goal of that function by itself. Now, if they're in a place where they feel like rapport is broken, if they feel attacked, if they feel like, they've got to defend themselves, they'll definitely go to introverted thinking, and then they'll tell you all the things you're thinking that are wrong, right? Like, you don't think like I do, so therefore you're wrong about this. But I think that's very much a defensive position, right? I think when when extroverted feeling, or at least for me, is in rapport with somebody and they're talking to them, maybe it's just because I've got ETP and I've got introverted thinking higher. I've noticed, though, that when I'm in rapport with them, they're incredibly interested by the thoughts I have to say, right? And especially ones that they believe that they can learn from. But if we're not in rapport, then they don't want to hear anything I have to say. And so rapport is so important for extroverted feeling. Like if you want to talk to somebody using that function, just get in rapport with them. And usually, unless they have a prejudice, unless they prejudge the individual, and then you have to kind of work around that, or there's baggage in the relationship, right?
Or the person's energy is just, for whatever reason going on in their life, is negative or sort of toxic at the time. And that's particularly true. My NI is always on alert, and I think I share this with INFJ, because you had mentioned about INFJs, like, why is everyone around me narcissistic? Like, when I listen to people, it used to be like, oh, I already know how you're going to complete your sentence, because not just that there's like a grammar structure to sentences, but like I see your thought.
Right.
And then I see the paradigm behind your thought. And now I'm like, oh, I see your consciousness. And then if that's like in a negative space, I'm like, I don't want to interact with that at all. And then I really try and step back from that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in some environments can be really positive and healthy. And then the other ones, I'm like, so it isn't even about authenticity. It's just like, is it bad vibes? And I don't want to be around bad vibes.
Yeah, and when an extroverted feeling person is in a bad vibe space, they are hoping to, they'll want to connect on whatever vibe. You got to meet them at their vibe. And if it's bad juju, if it's a bad vibe, then you kind of don't, like, if you're gonna do that, you meet them there, and if you can, you bring the vibe up as fast as possible. Because that's the other thing, is once you sync up with somebody using extroverted feeling, for the most part, again, unless they have prejudgment or unless they're bringing baggage, my observation is that they don't want to be there either. They just don't know how to get out of it. And so they're in a kind of a bad vibe space. And if you can meet them there, get in rapport, and then bring the vibe up, they will follow you all the way up. And they're going to be like, oh, I really like that person.
Yeah. Whereas conversely, I feel, and let us know your experience, because I feel like when I work with FI folks in some way, it's friends especially, if they are in a bad space, absolutely leave them alone.
Oh, yeah. No.
Absolutely. I will see you next month.
You got it.
Like, whatever it is.
Yeah, you can't bring those people up at all. They're just like, in fact, they will, if you try to mess with them.
Well, I think there's, at least for me, and maybe I'm not a introverted feeling dominant.
Yeah.
I at least want the person to try so I can reject them. I mean, if I'm being honest with myself,
I know.
There's a pleasure in
so crazy.
them at least attempting. Even if I don't want it, I at least want them to try to offer.
Yeah.
So I can reject it.
Right.
I don't know why I have that motivation. I hope not to do that. I mean, I don't want to do that, but I know that's part of my wiring.
Because that will validate that the negative down feeling you have is real.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Validation. Because I'm not self-validating. I'm looking for somebody else to validate it for me.
So as the person representing introverted feeling at the table, I do need to ask, what is the distinction between trying and then being rejected and liking that they tried and then got to reject them, versus what I said before, which is introverted feeling kind of wants you to meet them all the way where they're at to prove to them that you're willing to get through all those resistances. Like, what's the moment when you do want to do that? Well, I mean, do you ever want to do that, right? Like, maybe introverted feeling needs to know this about themselves and not require such extraordinary labor to be connected with. But that said, like, when is that pushing considered invasive or overreaching versus I kind of want you to do it because then you're proving that you want to.
First of all, it's probably very subjective person to person.
Of course.
So it's hard to make a blanket statement about all introverted feeling users. I will say what came up for me as you were talking about that is this idea when I'm in those spaces, and I'm guessing this is, and from clients we've worked with and other introverted feeling users, often a person is in that space of rejecting help when they don't even know what they want themselves. Often introverted feeling knows what it doesn't want more than it knows what it does want. So when introverted feeling knows what it wants, it's less likely to slap the hand away. Ultimately, it's going to, first of all, it's going to usually just go for it directly. But often you get lost in what it wants. All it knows is, where do you want to eat tonight? I know I don't want this. Well, what about this? No, I don't want that. You want this? No, I don't want that. Well, what do you want? I don't know. Keep naming stuff. I'll tell you. Like, it's almost like a process of elimination, I think, for introverted feeling. So I think
for every restaurant on the planet.
Yeah, it's and I'm not proud of this. I know it's in me. I know it's in introverted feeling. I know that's there. And when I get lost in those moments and I get in where I feel resistant to people wanting to help me or communicate with me, like I'm in the bad space, I'm trying to train myself more and more, and I've trained myself to some degree to say, what is it that I actually want in this situation? And often it's a permission issue. I don't feel like I can give myself permission for it, or I feel like it's not going to be acceptable, or the other person isn't going to like it, or maybe it's not my turn to get what I want. Maybe it's their turn. Like there's a bunch of reasons it might be a pushback, but often that's really the question that I need to ask myself when I get that space. So I don't know if I can give you a distinction answer in introverted thinking kind of way, but I could give you advice if you're a person that's talking to somebody that's got FP preferences in your life or introverted feeling anywhere, authenticity in their cognition, and they're using it, you're seeing it show up. I think this is one of the things you can really hone in on is what do they want? Like maybe ask them directly, what do you want? Or list things and help them work on a process of elimination to find out what they don't want, because that's a big key, I think, for introverted feeling is having a big list of stuff that I don't want to deal with or have in my life or whatever.
Right. And I would say my experience with FPs is when you're having one of those more like serious conversations and type, do not talk in type terms. Talk like a normal person. Yeah. You can use type as a model in the background, but when you begin that, especially for those, they're going to have TI as 7th or 8th function. Yeah. And now sometimes you can use type in a TE way that can be effective. But otherwise, in my experience, it's like, no, I'm not going to bring any type terms into this.
Right. Yeah. You mean introverted thinking?
Introverted thinking, yes.
Or 8th function, and extroverted thinking.
Yes, yeah. So if I sit down with like an INFP, and this is a serious topic, I'm not going to use type. Yeah. I'm going to be informed by type, but I will not mention any type terms at all or try and use any other conceptual model.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
So an advice, if you're listening along and you've got an FP person in your life, practical tip on speaking to FPs is, well, my experience is ... and sharing a personal story. I think stories are atomized experiences. And I think for an FP type, if they hear your experience as a communication tool, especially if it's laden with intention, that can go a long way to reach them.
Oh, this raises something that's so important. So if somebody mentions something, and then I talk about my experience with that same thing, like, oh, when I encountered that, this is what I did. Especially from FJ folks, there's a little bit of like, why are you turning the conversation to something about you? Totally. And I'm like, I am so not doing that. It's like, I would not presume to talk about it. I'm simply sharing what worked for me. And you are welcome to take whatever from that you want.
Well, I think what it is we had to figure this out too. I'm a TP, but we had to figure this out. Is that I was like, why are you always bringing the conversation back to you? Like, I'm the person who's dealing with the thing, right? And eventually I had to realize, no, Joel's creating sympathy.
Yeah.
Like he's in the moment trying to, almost like a tuning fork, find the same emotional experience in himself.
Yep.
And so if he can find the emotional experience in himself and share that with me, first of all, it's validating from his perspective. And introverted feeling is always seeking validation. I don't think extroverted feeling and introverted thinking are particularly seeking validation, not for their feelings, not for their emotional experience. And so that sharing it's like going, that's valid because other people feel it too. It's a valid experience.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to tuning fork the emotion so that when I can call up that sympathy, now I can really be here with you because I'm like, okay, where's this person at emotionally? This one, right? And I'll share the story and go like this. And then the other person's job is to go more like this, or like that, or thank you for meeting me, or whatever, right? That's the expected response, not that you're making everything about you. But I would say that as somebody who has extroverted feeling, I usually don't need the other person to validate my feeling. I don't, at least maybe this is introverted thinking, I don't know. But I don't need my feeling to be validated because it just exists. It just is. Like, and I've accepted that this is the thing I'm feeling. What I really need somebody to do is I need them to express that they care about they care about the feeling I'm feeling. They care that I'm in this experience, not that they're trying to resonate with it or sympathize with it, but they just care that I'm feeling this way, and that they'll let me communicate it and explain it and articulate it and like sort of like help me understand it so I can get past it and process it so I can get past it in this moment.
You know, that's so interesting, because I want to validate the feeling as being real, because feelings exist in all of these layers. And like underneath the frustration is anger. Underneath the anger is depression. Underneath the depression is fear, and is whatever it is. So a lot of times when FJs share the feelings, I'm like, this is a very superficial feeling. Like either let's get to the real thing, or I can't help you. Because for myself, it's like what helps me is to discover what is the real feeling underneath all of it. To just walk around feeling like, oh, like I feel like I don't need anybody to sympathize with me. I do appreciate, especially when someone with introverted thinking comes with a strategy I can use. But beyond that, I'm just like, this feeling that I'm feeling is probably not a real feeling. Like I really want help getting down to, besides having a practical strategy, is like, oh, underneath it, I'm afraid of X. And if somebody can help me get to that point, which FPs potentially can, because the FP is like something is off about what you're saying. Let me tell you about my experience, and I found it was like this. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like you helped me now go a deeper layer inside my own feeling, and that thing that I came to claiming I was feel like that was fake.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't fake, but it's like the outer layer of the onion, and like let's get to the deeper thing.
So probably because introverted feeling falls so far down the stack for me, like it's my seventh function. So it's very easy for me to be like, that's not a thing, right?
Hello.
Right. Exactly. By the time I get down there, it's all the meow mix commercial in my head. It's like, what are you feeling? And I'm like, meow, 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 meow. So when it's not very deep, but for me,
sung by the lead singer of The Cure.
Right.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
Right. If The Cure was singing meow mix, that's my seventh function.
Yeah.
So, emotions for me are almost always, and this is because of extroverted feeling, and I don't know, you, the listener, might be an FJ type, so maybe you can clarify when you have it higher up as a function, but emotions are almost always relational. Like I very rarely feel my feeling just all by myself. It's almost always attached to somebody else, right? And so then I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it and study it and, sort of like make sure it never happens again and own my part and have them own their part. And I want to turn it like almost into a laboratory. And what I know that it's very different than introverted feeling, because as extroverted feeling, if I am enraged, which happens relationally every once in a while, I'm in a fight with Joel and he's just saying all the wrong things, right? Everything he said is the wrong thing. And so I'm just spinning up and getting madder and madder and more angry. And how could you? And it's a lot of like, how could you? For me, it's like, I put myself in a position where I made myself vulnerable to you, and then you did something to me to exploit that vulnerability. And now you hurt me. And how could you do that to me? That's almost always the place I'm in when I'm all spun up emotionally. Or, like I've had a lot of sadness around my family. Like how could they do this to me? That's a lot of the, and I think that's kind of a core question with extroverted feeling is how could you do this to me? Right. But if I get spun up and angry, all I have to do is physically leave the place that I got angry at. I just have to leave the room for like 5 or 10 minutes. I just go for a walk, and then all right, I kind of come down and I'm like, all right, I guess I could come like a cooler head, right? Whereas introverted feeling can't do that. They've got to process the whole emotion.
Yeah, because it's an existential feeling, and it's mine. It's not a social emotion. And if I have an emotional state that I don't like, that's my responsibility to figure it out and deal with it.
Right.
And if it's legitimate, it actually will follow me around. And then it is something serious. And if I can leave the situation, I feel differently. I'm like, oh, okay, that was just like a superficial thing. But for the most part, with INTJ preferences, all of that stuff bounces off of me. Like all of the superficial stuff. In fact, I have a superpower to not notice it.
Yes, lucky bastard.
Like I literally somebody points that out later. That's so fascinating. Like I didn't even notice. But then when it does hit, it's like that arrow that gets in between like the chinks in the armor. Right. And like does hit, then even then even if I'm very angry with the person and I feel like they completely betrayed me or they were just like a series of expletives, it is my responsibility to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I mean, because I can't make them
Yeah.
do something different or feel differently or whatever it is. The only locus of responsibility and action I have is on myself. And because it's very deep.
Yeah.
I do understand if it's something more surfacey, then it's like, oh yeah, you know, people sit down and apologize and explain some stuff or whatever it is. Just say what needs to be said in a way. But yeah, it's just so hard because then it's, you know, those like existential emotions follow me wherever I go.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can't just rid yourself of them easily.
No.
So, what about your extroverted thinking, though? Like, I know we're talking about feelings and emotions and how they can like sort of rub each other the wrong way. And it's very clear that extroverted thinking is not too big of a fan of introverted thinking, actually. But I know that development for you was really important. And so, when I say, what about that? You know, we started this all off ostensibly, by the way, we're supposed to be talking about how to talk to all the types, but of course it's us. And so we just go wherever we want to.
Yeah. I think we're following all the judging functions, which is what you said was important. And we'll leave a little 5 minutes at the end for perceiving functions.
All right. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
It'll be fine.
And so you mentioned like direct communication and bottom line and linear. But I think a lot of times people really struggle to know how to interface with people who have extroverted thinking. They that bottom lining of things feels, and the directness, right? Because extroverted thinking is so naturally direct. I think people can sometimes struggle to know. It's like, okay, I can speak bottom line language, I can do all of that, but you know, like when they come at me or when they're being super direct or when they're just, you know, the image oftentimes, I don't think that this is true, but the image is barking orders or just having like assumptive language. Like, I told you go do that, you're going to go do that. Or the withholding of language, right? Do I need to tell you I love you? I told you I loved you when I married you. Like, why do I got to do that, right?
I'm still here.
Yeah.
If I didn't love you, I wouldn't be here.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Right. That's what the relationship is for, right? Is to let you know that. So, interfacing, we're kind of going down the rabbit's hole of interfacing in more complex ways with these other functions. What's a way to interface in a more complex way with extroverted thinking?
But I will also say before you answer that, that people mistake extroverted thinking as being like badly intended or just selfish. And there's a very giving element to it.
Yes.
It's a service element. It wants to contribute, you know, it wants to show up and do good for other people. It's not just selfish and barking orders, I think, is a good thing to remember about it.
Yes. So there is, because it's extroverted, there is an element of involving the rest of the world. So people's resources, actual material resources, all of that. Especially because it's in my second function. So as John Beebe would say, it's like in the parental, like the helpful parent role. I want to use extroverted thinking to help, not just myself, but other people. When I lay out, like, this is like a step-by-step way we can do this quickly, I'm really trying to help all of us and even the other person, because I can see many times people, I mean, if they're not TJ types, like, they do not have their TJ act together oftentimes. And I'm just like, if you do this and this and this, like, that will take care of your problem. And the person doesn't listen. And I'm like, there's nothing that makes life better than actually making it better. People can tell stories and we can relate and we can cry over it and whatever, but I'm like, if you're homeless, you're still going to be homeless after we cried about it. So, like, let's solve your homelessness problem. And either the person is capable of going there, or they're capable but resistant, or maybe they're not capable. I understand not all people can be taught to fish. Okay, so that's, you need things like a safety net and so on. It gets very frustrating when, to me, it's just so obvious how, and even if I'm doing 90% of the work, I'm like, why are you so resistant to actually being helped? Like, it's just, or like, if you did these 3 steps, you will suddenly find you are like so much further along. Like, why don't you just do it?
So do you expect that is because people, it's actually not what they're looking for? They actually don't want that solution. They want like an emotional solution, and you think it's a physical solution? Or do you think they just really don't want help? Like, why would somebody resist that? Because I have similar, cognition as you do. Mine's at the tertiary 10-year-old level, but extroverted thinking makes so much sense to me. But I do see people reject my help too. And I'm like, why are you doing this? This makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the expectation? Do you think they need an emotional payoff?
So this is what I observed. Is I know someone with ENFJ, and she's watching this TV show Army Wives. And Army Wives, unlike SEAL Team, which is the male version, the Army Wives is very much about using extroverted feeling. A lot of the characters are using FE. It's so fascinating that time and again, over like you've seen snippets of 3 or 4 episodes, that the characters solve things by sitting down and talking about it. And it just so happens that circumstances are right, because, this is actually a TV show, it's not real life, that the characters just talked and they're like, oh, if I give this and you give that, then it works for both of us. Except that real life doesn't work that way, at least in the way it's structured socially. So it's not like if we sit down and haven't given a talk and the person's like, well, I'm homeless, and if I pony up $100 and you pony up $900, then isn't that a great solution? Because the person is feeling out of the goodness of their heart because they had a story when they grew, were like in a tough spot and somebody came in and helped them. And there's a whole it's not just extroverted feeling in that moment, in that context. Extroverted feeling has an entire story about people's lives and how they interact with each other socially. And it's like, you can always find a reason or make things work in a way. You can bring the community together to help that family whose home was destroyed by a tornado. I think that's an example of like an effective FE.
Yeah.
But so often I'm like, yeah, just talking isn't going to create the solution. You need to actually work. And you need to do things like adding up numbers. Nothing annoys me more than innumeracy. It's like, if you are, just admit it and hand it over to somebody else. But just talking about it isn't going to actually materially fix the problem. And no, I'm not willing to pay $900 in order, of the 90% of it to make it work. And because I don't have that story and I'm not motivated that way. And it's just so there's almost there is this philosophical worldview that if we all cooperate with each other, we'll all make it. And idealistically, I think that that's true. And I think there is a way that communities can operate that makes that mostly true. It's not wrong, but I think in the world we live in, it's very unrealistic many times.
Yeah. Maybe the smaller the system, like a family system, for example.
Yes.
5, 6 people in a family.
Right. Every day, it's every day we need to empty the trash in this house of 7 people. So, maybe if one of us empties the trash every day and we agree to it, and it's not, it's just about explaining why it's annoying and this and that, and it's whatever, but it's there's a social agreement. Mm-hmm. I think at that level, FE works very well. Mm-hmm. But when we get to the level of the way society is structured, people just don't behave that way. The moment we're too far relationally, people just don't. There's free riders, including FE folks who are free riders. Every type can be a free rider. And I'm like, didn't they just want something for nothing? It's you know that they're con men, right? Yeah. So when the FJ person tells me they've been conned several times and how wrong that was and they're a victim, and I'm like, part of being a mature person is avoiding people who are con men.
So idealism is difficult to scale.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
It works in small units very well, but the bigger you get, the more you have to be sort of savvy. And I do think that when extroverted feeling types...
Yes, be more savvy.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, I think when FJ types have introverted thinking integrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they're not just relying on extroverted feeling and the assumption that everybody's going to help each other out, but when they have that introverted thinking sort of savvy, when they're like... No, I think I know what's going on here. I don't think that there is much that way.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. So I'm describing the situation that frustrates me.
Right. So, okay. So that's actually good though, because then now we've got an extroverted thinking energy in a mildly frustrated situation. So now how does somebody interface with you in that situation?
How would they speak to you?
How could I, if I approach you and extroverted thinking, just like we were talking about before with introverted feeling being upset and extroverted feeling being upset, how does one interface when extroverted thinking is upset?
When extroverted thinking is upset.
Or frustrated about things.
Frustrated. Show me that you're going to do some kind of bottom line action.
Mm-hmm. I had I think an ESTJ person, I didn't type them, but an ESTJ tell me that they don't need an apology. Apology means nothing.
That's
just
right.
Change behavior.
Absolutely.
I don't care about the words. I don't care what you say to me. If you change behavior, that's the apology.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I care about. Bottom line this. Just do something
Now,
different.
I do understand, because I've even been in a situation where I'm like, I understand what you want, and it's really hard for me to change my behavior to meet what you want. And I don't think you're being unreasonable, but like, give me some slack. So when I do say I'm sorry, if it's coming out of FI, like, please listen to that. Like, I am sorry, and I am trying. So I do expect some, flexibility, and I'll accept that from others. If the person is legitimately, if they give me the FI answer to my TE frustration, I will accept that.
Well, and what makes it very difficult when extroverted thinking has that as a framework is then there's no reconciliation in the moment. Then reconciliation is now stretched over time. Like, change your behavior and then we're fine. But that's very unsatisfying to, like if there was discord, maybe this is just my extroverted feeling talking, but when there's discord, it is nice to have a moment of reconciliation, right? A moment of apology and I forgive you, and then let's make different changes going forward. If extroverted thinking is like, I don't want your apology, I just want you to change behavior. It's like, well, now there's an open loop of discord until you get whatever it is that you're looking for.
And you don't need to do
reconcile.
all 10 steps in it. If you can just do even step 1, I'm like, oh, good, you took like a practical action. Thank God. And now we're on the right track. Now I'm like much more chill with the person. And then I'm like, yeah, then we can like say our sorries.
Yeah. It's almost like a symbol of intent to alter course.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in a moment of discord, if you believe that you have wronged the extroverted thinking, like they're upset for reasons that you agree with, then a symbol of intent of changed path is good. But what if you don't agree with them? What if you think that they're being stubborn?
I mean, if the person is lying, consistently, they just don't do what they say that they're going to do or something, then I'm like, either I need to figure out a way to tolerate it and work around it, or I need to disengage.
What if you're in the wrong, though, and you realize that in retrospect? How does a person approach you? I mean, have you ever been in a situation where you're like salty and it was your extroverted thinking that got triggered,
So I remember, so this has happened a couple of times. However, well, I would say it happens in 2 ways. One is with somebody that I am not that close to, but I know. And I call them on BS that doesn't turn out well, because that's like a TE, like calling somebody in BS. Like, you're just literally lying, like factually that's untrue. Like, it's materially false. Like, stop lying. Of course, most people are going to be offended by that. Even if they know that they're lying, they're still going to be offended. In those cases where I wasn't that familiar with the person, the weird thing was, within 6 months, every person that we know in common was like, Dario, you were so right. That person is like completely manipulative and stupid, or like whatever it was. So I feel very vindicated. On the other hand, when it's somebody closer to me, probably my TE is not as objective as it thinks it is. And then I end up being, and this is often happens with TE, cruel to the people immediately adjacent to us that we're close to. And then I'm like, it's very difficult. And the only way really to get through is for the FI person to be like very gently saying like, I'm a person too. Treat me like a person.
So even if the person it doesn't have introverted feeling, no matter what their type is, if they're engaged with somebody who's using extroverted thinking and that
abusive way
is an abusive way, just a gentle reminder that they're engaging with a human, not an object.
Yeah. And then the question is, if the TJ person is like reasonably healthy or average, they will eventually respond to it. And I want to emphasize eventually, because they may not hear it the first 5 times. If they're unhealthy, they may not hear it in the first 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is. And then that the person in a way is like a monster to their immediate family, and then like a community paragon to everyone else.
Right.
And then that's when there's that really strong disconnect. And then TJ types will really resist intervention in those cases. It's like because I believe that each of the 8 functions has like a superpower connected with the structure of the psyche itself. And for NI, it's the connection with the unconscious. And for TE, it's the defense of the ego.
Yeah.
And that's just like FE is always involving other people, like other psyches.
Yeah.
Each one of them has its thing.
Yeah. Well, both people using introverted feeling and extroverted thinking, you should be very grateful that there's extroverted feeling people out there that will just endlessly try to help you and meet you where you're at.
I know.
Yeah.
I know we're challenging.
Yeah.
I get it.
I would say the people who've helped me the most either were TP or FP types. The TP, because they're really coming with, they're able to introduce a model or ask a question that like changes my way of thinking about it. And I'm like, that is such a good question, or that is such a smart principle or model. And with the FP types, they're just like very patient and they speak very quietly. But I can think of an INFJ teacher that I had. I mean, as an adult, taking a class as an adult, very high functioning, really, really like wise, mature. And that's like, and I reckon knowing type, I was like, this is somebody to learn from and to put myself one down and just be like, you know what, this is really tough. I don't feel good about this, but at some level, I know that she's right. And I just got to figure it out. And the same, I'm in a writing group over the years. There's an INFJ. There's actually another INFJ. She will just bluntly give feedback sometimes. Every single time she's right. I just go and I think about it. And now I've accelerated to just like within 5 minutes as I'm listening, just accept, like really take it in and try it on. Really try it on. And I'm like, wow. And so that I think she's using a lot of TI in that moment. And so I think some way to reach the TE types is when the TI person or person using TI can be really succinct and just get the heart of what it is, because TJ is like a little bit ad hoc and like, I'm using this model over here and this one over here and that one over there, and they're not really consistent, to be frank. It's like I'm using metric and I'm using imperial units. And it's like, if somebody can bring it together and just be like really succinct about it. So it's either FI or TI, I think, is a way to reach the TE folks.
To come back to principles, as you were talking about, you felt this person, this INFJ, you felt like I could go underneath them and learn from them.
Yes.
It was a very positional statement.
Yes.
Like there's somebody listening right now that doesn't share TJ preferences. It's like,
yes.
Why would you even think of it hierarchically like that? That's so weird to think of like the position. But there's probably unspoken as a principle level when we communicate with others, there's an unspoken rules of engagement, like a hierarchy structure we're coming in with, a relation, like void of all the content, whether it's demonstrative content or articulated content. There's other things that we're not mostly factoring in. Like how's this person going to respond if I approach them in a dominant frame versus more of a supplicant frame, right? I come in underneath them versus I come over them. Like all that stuff matters when we talk to other types.
Right.
And we're not even talking about that, right? That's all the soft science of it, but that matters too. Like how people expect us to engage with them, which we don't have time to unpack. But
Yeah.
You reminded me of that.
Right. And I don't necessarily mean that I'm only thinking of hierarchy. There also is this element of like, if I actually want to be a student and learn in this class, I need to actually take the role of a student.
Yeah.
Like, just to be very frank, like, and either I'm serious about it or I'm not.
Yeah.
And I say it in those stark terms because if I'm always hedging my bet, then am I really going to learn every time there's something that comes up that like offends my ego or is like too difficult or whatever it is? And the irony is, and we've talked about this before. I mean, it's, somebody somewhere, it was about, you know what, it's resisting that makes it more difficult. The moment I stop resisting, then it becomes easier. Now, I don't want to do that in a way that's dangerous to me, but if I have respect, and this is something I've learned from types like ESTP and ESTJ, if I have respect for this person and they have respect for me as a student or whatever, then it's actually very safe to be that one down position.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But there needs to be that element of respect. And I need to know that they're authentic. They don't even need to have 100% right information or something, because that's obviously if I'm in the student, like, how am I supposed to evaluate that? But there needs to be some level of respect that's there. And that's, and you know, that comes in with different things. I mean, the different provers in a way. In NLP, it's like, what is the prover?
Yeah. So let's start to wrap up. We've been doing this for a while here. We did mention, I think, all four of the judging cognitive functions and how maybe they want to communicate outwardly, but also be communicated with.
I think the only thing we didn't talk about is how to approach introverted thinking when it's salty.
Well, you just avoid them. There's nothing you can do. Well, explain what salty feels like to introverted thinking. You said that you noticed that I and other FP users are looking for emotional validation often in the FI, introverted feeling authenticity space. Would you, we've talked about this before, we would draw a correlation to thoughts for introverted thinking. Mm-hmm. So saltiness may not be a feeling experience. It might be like, you're not listening to me. I need my thoughts to be validated, understood. Like you want to be understood or have your thoughts recognized.
Yeah. I do believe that the ability to have a complete thought when I'm upset. Now, I know that a lot of times I'm upset because of relational things, and that's what pops up for me. But you know, there is a tendency to want to deconstruct everything. There's a tendency to want to understand it and flay it out, and and really like have somebody who will hold space while I'm trying to understand all of it, even if I'm emotionally upset at the time. And I think when I'm communicating these thoughts, just kind of like if you're expressing an emotion and a person's like, why do you feel that way? Like, you shouldn't feel that way. If I'm communicating my thoughts around something and a person indicates that, it's like, well, you don't have to think that, right? Like, that's like, you know, like, why are you thinking about it that way? It feels very invalidating. And especially if I'm in that space and I get cut off, like I need to be able to have a full expression. And so when I'm upset, one of the best things you can do is not ask me how I'm feeling. Don't say, you know, like, how are you?
But that's the information I need, Antonia.
Like, the worst thing a person can go is like, how are you feeling right now? I actually did this to another ENTP. I was like, how are you doing? How are you really doing? And then I realized that's the worst question I could ask this person. They're like, I don't know. And then they immediately started talking about some conceptual thing about like, you know, where the world is going. And I'm like, that's right. That's our place. So I don't need somebody to help me emotionally at all. I need them to care about what I'm thinking and go like, what's bothering you is a much better question than how do you feel? Like, what's frustrating you? Because I can process frustration, right? Frustration is something that I almost don't even experience that as emotion. Like, frustration is just like, I'm trying to work something out and I'm not quite there and I'm like getting anxious for the result. And so like, what's frustrating you? Like, what happened that, you know, put you in this space, right? And then if I can get like, blah, I can just explain the whole thing and deconstruct it. It's very cathartic. And I do believe that every type has its challenges, right? Extroverted thinking gets mischaracterized as bullyish or, you know, like just wanting its way or whatever. An introverted feeling gets mischaracterized as being self-centered. An extroverted feeling gets mischaracterized as being like too, almost like socially controlling, right? Like they always want to control the experience.
And no boundaries.
And no boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And I think the challenge with introverted thinking, or at least one of the things I've had, is the bluntness that comes along with it. The unself-conscious bluntness. I think extroverted thinking is very direct, but it knows it's being direct and it just doesn't care, right? Introverted thinking is like, I'm totally saying this in complete and total innocence and I didn't know that I was literally offending everybody, and I'm looking around, I'm like, oh shit, I did it again, right? Look, I don't get to have that friendship anymore because I said that one thing and now they're like breaking up with me over text, and I'm like, I guess I don't get to have that friend. So there's a sort of a sense of loneliness that comes along with introverted thinking. Like, nobody actually ever wants to really hear what you have to say. Like, not really. If you can teach them something, sure, give me the information, just the information I need. But there's a real desire and need to express thoughts. And it feels like almost everybody is going to say, well, you can't say that, or that's offensive, or, you know, like, you're not supposed to think that way. And when that function is frustrated and upset, or at least the person is, and they have that function, it's just being able to just say what you're really thinking, at least in that moment. Like, after I vent, I realize I was a lot harsher than I needed to be. Like, I don't actually think all of that, but I just needed somebody to be willing to let me say it all, even if it was horrifically offensive, even if like it was sort of like it melted the paint off the walls. I just need somebody to let me say it.
Oh, and so that when a TJ type says what's on their mind and it's uncomfortable or nasty, they actually do mean that. Yeah. Like, it's not like, oh no, I mean, I would think like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, but I still think it's true.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, unless new evidence comes along to show me like, oh no, like what happened, like the scenario was not as I thought it was.
Yeah.
But otherwise it's like, yeah, I said that and unfortunately I do think that.
Right. Yeah. And I think I mostly do, but there are times I just need to vent. I just need to say it's more that I just need to say all the thoughts I've had, not the ones that are necessarily that I've landed on. I just need to communicate all the ones that were there. And then once I've just am able to vomit all the thoughts out, then I can sort them. But it's like they bottleneck because I wasn't able to say them at the time I had them. And so I wasn't able to really, maybe this is ENTP preferences too. I mean, somebody who's leading with introverted thinking might not have as much of a compulsion, but I bet when they're upset, they do. Right? I bet when they're upset, they really want to talk.
I think introverted thinking anywhere has this need.
And a lot of INTPs say that they feel that they're unheard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if I can just have the person, even if I'm saying like unspeakable things, just hang with me. When I'm done with the purge, I'll go back and clean up the mess and be like, I don't actually think that. I don't actually feel that way. I don't actually, that's not actually the truth. It's actually this thing. But I just needed to vomit it out. So I think holding space and saying, what's going on for you? What's frustrating you? And it's a little reluctant, right? And the reluctance is not because I want you to work for it. It's not like introverted feeling where it's like, prove that you really care, right? Prove that you really want to come all the way over to me. It's not that I'm reluctant because I want to make sure you care about me. It's that I want to make sure that you're ready for what is about to happen. Right? And like,
are you prepared for the truth?
Yeah. Like, are you sure you want what I'm about to say? Not, are you sure you love me or care about me or whatever? Like, are you ready for me to say all the things that are bottlenecking? And so if I think there's a green light and I can do all of that, and like the person, I blasted their hair back, then it's like, okay, we're good as long as we can get through all of that. And I don't know if I'm saying things that will eternally haunt you, like Joel's really good at just being like, that's whatever you said, which is awesome because then I can just blah, right? And it doesn't.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been working on is introverted feeling in a way that absolutely anything that happens from the outside, including some TI person, blah, 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 literally will have no effect on me whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like 100% my inner peace is like mine wherever I go. And that's like, you will never make my hair go back.
Right.
And that's just like, I'm not saying I have gotten there. That's like aspirational process.
Yeah.
But but to do that in an authentic way that I'm also not like, because I'm some like ideological fanatic or something like that. It's like, it's an authentic, like, inner peace that's just like unshakable. Still working on it.
Yeah. I think we actually I'm sorry. So just for context, and I'm going to be radically honest, I'm going to do that introverted thinking thing where I reveal information that probably makes everybody else uncomfortable. But before we started this podcast, we're like, we need to talk about something practical that people like can use. But you and I, Dario, like whenever we talk, we're just like, we go into NT land of conceptual and all that stuff. And so we're like, look, we're going to do it this time. And I think we kind of met in the middle. We kind of figured that out. But I think what it's turned into is, how do you talk to the types when they're upset? And I don't know if we need to talk to sensing and intuition as much. I mean, do those functions qualify as much? Or should we head that direction, do you think?
I think we'll probably still call this how to talk to every type because we started off that way. We end up a little bit upset. But I guess here's what I want to do. Let's table sensing and intuiting unless you have something
No, I was going to say how to talk about every type in parentheses when they're upset.
We can also do that too.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to draw attention back to, principle-wise, is I'm watching us talk about this, and we keep back to the person is the instrument, listening. Like, we're actually not talking about talking as much. We're talking about how to listen, how to understand that person, what's going on for them,
leave space,
what's going on for
person.
us. Like, it's all about the inputs more than the outputs. It's not about what to say, what specific words will work. It's how to really understand where that person's coming from on the principle level. And the words are just the content we fill in after you understand the principles, right? I think that's really the approach that we've come here today, emergently. We didn't plan this in the conversation. It feels very much like some of the notes I took down, like, again, the self-awareness level of yourself, and then other people, being aware of them and, how you're impacting them by what you're saying, but how they get impacted in general. And then the one thing that you brought us back to again, Antonia, like midway through the whole conversation, was this question or this statement back to somebody when they say something to you is, so what I hear you saying is, and then repeat back the understanding you took from the interaction. Like, if you have some of those principles in place, it doesn't matter the person's type. It doesn't matter your type. Those are basic principles that will work with everybody because you're genuinely showing up. Now, there's people that are tough, right? They're not going to let you do this.
Yeah.
But most people are genuinely open if you approach this with curiosity and openness and a framework of humility. And I think that's really the core principle we're also talking about here is bringing a humbleness to the interaction. Clearly, you seem to extroverted feeling can trigger you, Dario. That's just it's true.
I mean, it's my seventh function.
Yeah.
And it's,
And there's some FJ listening right now that you trigger them. Like extroverted thinking just it's really challenging for them.
It's very common for
Right?
FJs to be triggered by it.
Yeah, and so with that in mind, we know that about ourselves. You know that you probably have to pull on more resources when you're talking to an FJ person because unless you know them really well, that's just a type you struggle with, like a function you struggle with. And there's people out there that struggle with the functions you use, extroverted thinking. There's people that struggle with introverted feeling. They don't like me and the way I show up to the world. They struggle with that. And knowing that about them lets me help interface with them better and be more open, be more humble in those ways. So I think that's some of the principles I'm taking away from this conversation. Do you have some principles, either of you, that I didn't mention, or do you feel that's a good summary?
I think that's a pretty good summary. I was just thinking that idea that we have an impact on other people is something that was it was just such a blind spot for me. And I do think it's type related. I think TP types, and particularly ETP types, ESTPs and ENTPs, we don't know that we're impacting other people. It's just we're totally blind to it. And I think it's because we're blind to how other people are impacting us. We just assumed that nobody can hurt my feelings. Nobody can say anything to impact me. And we really have to, I think we have to get into a certain place of maturity where we start registering, I am impacted. I'm just ignoring it. I'm just not registering it. And the things I say to other people aren't just all jokes. It's not just all water off a duck's back. So I think that's a really important thing to remember is we do legitimately have impact on other people when we're talking to them, and how we approach them matters. It really does matter. And that was the only thing that got kicked up from what you were talking about.
And I would say the other half of that in introverted feeling is how you feel inside, even when you're unaware of it, which is basically and that could be any type, because there are layers to the feelings, that's going to affect your behavior and your mood and your thinking. So that the INTP or ISTP out there, or the TP types, or yes, my thinking is very objective, or the TJ types, very objective. I'm you have unconscious feelings and values that are influencing your thinking. And, you need to look at them and acknowledge them, and you will be a happier person. The people around you will be happier if you acknowledge those, because maybe you'll be, less of a hard kind of person.
Well, and then on the flip side, I think feeling types just their assumption about themselves, just like thinking types assume that they're being unbiased and completely rational and logical and objectively, accurate or true or real, or they have all the right information.
I already know what you're going to say.
Well, I was going to say feeling types just see themselves as endlessly empathetic and sympathetic. And
I'm very selfless.
Yeah, selfless. And
very selfless.
Always have the right intentions and always have other people's best interest at heart. And they need to acknowledge that they have an inner critic, right?
Yeah.
Something that's very critical of themselves and other people. And that inner judge, that critic that's judging other people harshly, is going to start popping up in these moments of empathy and sympathy. And that's why sometimes feeling types will catch themselves in a passive aggressive moment, right? They're because they don't want to let go of the image of themselves that they're endlessly, humanistic. And then they find themselves being kind of but kind of sticking it to the person. I think that's the corollary to the thinker being no, I'm totally always objective and reasonable, but then missing how they're emotionally influenced, or information is emotionally influenced.
And then the converse, and I'm wondering how you deal with it with introverted feeling, especially when it's dominant. I want to sort of say to those folks, no matter how good your intentions were, the fact is when you look behind you and you see a trail of fire and disaster, okay, that should be a little clue that your intentions, as good as they are not connected to effectiveness. And so it's and sometimes I just feel like they put up, they're there's only now and forward. And I'm not going to look back and see that it didn't work, and I'm going to hang on to my values no matter what.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, in that case, it's like I'm knocking on a door that isn't going to open. Yeah. But I do believe it's possible that when that person feels safe to open up, I've seen this with an INFP, really angry about his neighbor, of all things, supposedly ideological in nature. And it's like he just needed a safe space in order to discuss it and like know that people were being honest in helping him overcome what was obviously an addiction to anger.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think we've squeezed the lemon as much as we can get out of it?
5 lemons.
Well,
Yeah.
at
5
this
lemons.
point, I think we're moving on to an egregious amount of time. But I
Yeah.
think I personally really enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was really good. I got a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And I think your core principles are accurate. And I think just going back to that original premise, which is type can be. I think when we first learn type, it is a more powerful tool than we even really understand. Like we know it's powerful because we're so attracted to it. And the attraction is because it is an intrinsically powerful tool. We can feel it. But we don't understand just how powerful it is. And it can turn really stompy-trompy. Like it can turn really, like it can be a very, it becomes like I mentioned before, it's like a flamethrower. And when we're using type to interact and communicate with people, I think, like you mentioned, Joel, going to these deeper layers of like what's their premise, what's their starting point, not just what are like words that we can use, although those are helpful too, to be able to build rapport with strangers that are of certain types, or like somebody you have to build rapport with at work. But when we're engaged in interacting with somebody that we have enough intimacy with that we are going to see them mad, or we have enough intimacy where we've got to make this relationship work, whether or not we like the person, right? Like they're a coworker or they're somebody in our family, and we just have to deal with them. I think being willing to not just look for like buttons to push, but a deeper layer. Like, what is it that introverted feeling is really doing when it rejects you? Right? What's really going on there? Well, they want to know that you really want to help them. They want to know you're motivated by it. This is not just like a duty. What is extroverted feeling really needing? It needs to know that you will hang with it. It wants to be in a vibe with you. It wants to be connected, that you want to be connected to it. So there's like these deeper motivations and desires and wants and needs. And that is fueling all of this. And so if you can get down to that level, like you were talking about, Joel, and then remember the impact you're having, and then remember all the things you're bringing that you might be blind to, and just be aware that you might be bringing things, that you're not always empirically in the right position. Yeah. I think that this is one of the most useful applications of type.
Yes. Now, you've been listening along or watching along. You haven't had a microphone. It's just been the three of us talking, Dario, Antonia, and myself. But I'm sure stuff's been coming up for you. As you're listening along, as you're watching us talk about this, what is sparking in your own cognition? Like, what are you thinking and feeling about the subjects we brought up today? We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, share your comments, ask a question. More importantly, I want to encourage you to bring your story, your personal story around this. Do you have a personal story of trying to talk to somebody maybe in a certain situation, a certain type, and then you went back and regrouped, and then you approached them again and it went well, or maybe you regrouped and it went even worse the next time? We want to hear those stories. I think a really interesting discussion could form around this. So come over and make your voice heard. Personalityhacker.com. Dario, somebody wants to find out more about you. You've written a lot of books. You've got a lot of materials on Amazon. So if they search your name, Dario Nardi, on Amazon, that's a great place. Also, radiancehouse.com is a great place to find what you're into, the time the person types it in. And that's spelled with an A, right?
Yes, that's right. Radiance is with an A. Yes.
Fantastic. And they can find all about you, and you've got some new projects and things you're working on. You're releasing new books and materials and courses all the time. So anything else you want to say before about that or
I
other
think
places
that does
to go?
it. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on once again. And thank you for bringing your honesty. This is a really good conversation because you're bringing your authentic self. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, it really helps us out a lot. This is a video podcast now on YouTube. So go check out Personality Hacker. the original, not the Personality Hacker podcast, but the Personality Hacker channel, and you'll be able to watch this video podcast and leave a comment there as well. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are designed to help you become the best version of yourself through the lens of personality type. In fact, we even have programs that we have co-created with Dr. Dario Nardi, body-mind practices, the personality types in yoga, and personalities in focus. So head over to personalityhacker.com, check out our suite of programs, including the ones that we have co-created with Dr. Dario Nardi, and see which one is right for you.
Thanks, Dario, for being here. We'll have to have you back.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Can't wait until it happens. And we'll squeeze the lemon once again
Yes.
of your brain.
Yeah, we're going to shake the lemon tree.
That's right.
That's right.
The old mind grapes.
That's right. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
I'm Dario Nardi.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.